Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of the Leaders in Supply Chain podcast. Delighted to have with us today Massimo Andolina, who is the Senior Vice President of Operations for Philip Morris International. He's been in the role since 2018, and prior to that, he's been more or less 15 years with the company. He's walked through a series of jobs from Director Operations Planning to different Vice President jobs, Operations Latin America and Canada, Vice President Operations European Union, Vice President of Business Transformation. And prior to joining PMI, Massimo has had an eclectic career, really. He's worked in a multitude of industries. He's worked for Tetra Pak in several jobs. He's worked for Fiat in automotive as well. And very early in his career, he was also a lieutenant, weren't you, Massimo, in the Italian army. So maybe let's start there. It's not every day that I get a chance to speak to such a wide background. And tell us a little bit about your career, maybe more specifically. Tell us about your inflection points, what brought you to where you are today, which we might not see immediately from your CV, Massimo.
Terrific. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Rado. So Massimo Andolina, as you said, so I'm Italian, as you can infer from my name, and I am a mechanical engineer by training. And rather, when you are Italian and you are a mechanical engineer, there are two things only that you want to do in life. The first thing is design engines and design machines of all sorts and kinds. And the second one, if you cannot do the first one, is run large production plants. And that's exactly when I finished my career at the university. That's exactly where I started my professional career. For the first 8 years of my life, my career, my focus and aspirations were focused on learning manufacturing in a variety of different environments. Actually, I started, as you said, as a lieutenant, as an engineering lieutenant in the technical corps of the Italian army. And there I was working actually on machines. Those machines were usually either tanks or sometimes raiders, more often missiles. And I did that for the period of my service in the army. But then I moved to Procter & Gamble, and there I started getting really interested in the world of manufacturing on a large scale, FMCG products, very exciting. And from there I moved, as you said, to automotive, to Fiat, and I had the opportunity early on in my career to run small manufacturing plants. We were making components that were going into the cars, but very exciting because you were confronted with all the things that you had studied and with the fact of being able to run a factory on your skin 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every week. And from there, I decided to go abroad and I joined a tobacco company, Reynolds International. Today it's called Japan Tobacco International. And that's a company where I joined in Switzerland, but then that took me to Ukraine and then ultimately to Russia, where I had the opportunity to work on the startup of the operations for RJR in Russia. At that point, it was the largest market that they were getting into. And that's also the place where I lived through the 1998 financial crisis in Russia. And as you mentioned, inflection points, that was probably the first major inflection point in my career. Living through that crisis, and it was a moment in which each of us there had to take on more than probably we were ready for, both because we were starting a new business, but there was also the entire crisis situation. And I had to expand myself from manufacturing much more also into supply chain. And how are we going to survive in this environment in crisis with our entire supply chain in the country? And that crisis made me learn a lot of things, but also opened my eyes to the fact that while I knew well how to make a machine work, at that point I knew fairly well how to make a factory work. But when I look at the complex system of an international business or of a very large business, with all the intricacies and complexity that it has, I realized that managing the business required a lot of other skills that I did not have. And so that was the moment in which my first inflection was, I'll take a pause and I'll go back to studying. And that's when I came back to Switzerland. I was accepted at IMD, and I decided to take a year off and a full 1 year MBA. Big inflection, going back to studying, putting away everything that you have learned, learning new things, understanding larger and bigger systems from multiple angles, looking at strategy, looking at marketing, looking at finance, communication, so organization, all the different angles of a business. Very enriching year that took me to make a career change. And I changed company at that point and I joined Tetra Pak, but I also changed my line of business. And I went and worked exactly in that, in strategy, strategic marketing, commercial like projects, and especially competitive analysis, and how would we respond from a business standpoint, and ultimately to go and run a country for Tetra Pak in South America. So I stayed at Tetra Pak for about 8 years, and terrific experience. The one thing that I also saw in that experience was looking at how important supply chain was in terms of the impact that it had on me as an MD of a business running that business. And therefore the importance on supply chain, on my ability to deliver to my customers the promise that I had made. And that's what brought me then to deciding to come back to supply chain when I joined Philip Morris, and then all the roles that you mentioned before, and the past several years, almost 14 years now, so very exciting. But there is one thing that from all this I would like to say. Supply chain is very exciting. Supply chain is that place where the marketing promise of a wonderful experience to a consumer is actually made reality. It's realized and it's delivered. It is also the brain and the muscle around which the entire business turns. You can make all wonderful PowerPoints that you want, but if ultimately your supply chain is not in place to turn it into a real product and experience that you can deliver to the consumer, and when he expects it, how he expects it, and at the cost at which he or she expects it, then it's all irrelevant. And third, in today's digital world, it is what builds consumer delight, satisfaction, and loyalty. I always like, when I talk to my colleagues, to refer to the example of Amazon. Amazon is an amazing example. After spending many years building the technology for them to have the most advanced store on the internet, they have literally spent the past 10 plus years making sure that they have the best supply chain in the world. And that is what is the differentiating element at this point of Amazon. The fact that their supply chain is absolutely precise, respond to the needs of the consumers, where they need it, when they need it, predictable, at the right cost. That is really what is bringing consumers back over and over again to Amazon. But the story that I would like to tell you today, Radu, and to everyone that is listening, is a story about an epochal transformation. That is the one that over the past 6 years, we have gone through at Philip Morris International. This is the transformation of a company that is a very large and very successful multinational company that decides to transform itself and its industry from within, putting in play everything that it has for something else in the future. And I would like to talk to you about what the transformation means in terms of how it has changed what we do, how it has changed how we do everything inside the company, and evidently how it has required a drastic change and a transformation of how we interpret supply chain in the company. Yep. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Good. So this story starts in 2016 when PMI decides to formally kick off its transformation, making an external commitment after many years of preparation, developing the science, developing the products, developing the technology that enables it, making a commitment to the entire world that we will deliver a smoke-free world, replacing the very product that was the essence of our business with something else. And in order to do so, we realized early on that there were 3 major axes of transformation that we had to run. We had to change our products and introduce completely new products to consumers. We needed to change ourselves in terms of our corporate persona in order to be able to engage with a variety of stakeholders in the outside world that needed to be part of this change. Otherwise, this change in the world would be impossible. And last but not least, but probably the most important and the one that touched each and every one of us as individuals, that we needed to transform the organization, ourselves, and the capabilities of the job that we had to do. We were taking a company that was a 100% B2B company, multinational but stable, in a very stable and predictable business, oftentimes for the maturity of the business, siloed in the way how we worked internally, largely based on one category of product. That was, to a large extent, marketing centric. We were really spending probably more time looking at our brands and how we design and how we make them more attractive to consumers than really looking at what consumers need. And when I look at supply chain, definitely manufacturing centric. And we had to pivot that into a company that is completely consumer centric in everything that it does, that is driven and enabled by the science that we constantly develop and by what the technology allows us to do to put that science inside products that we can bring to the fruition of consumers. That becomes multi-category in that we need to start handling technological devices that work together with consumables, that have accessories that go with them, and not only on one platform, but on a variety of different and very diverse platforms. And a company that is capable to constantly develop science and technology to continuously bring news, innovative, and better, and that is the most important element, better products to our consumers and for our consumers. This journey, Radu, started 6 years ago. And in just 6 years, although these have been 6 extremely intense years, we have managed to convert 21.2 million people from being smokers to adopting IQOS and abandoning smoke. We have managed to shift 1/3 of our revenues from our old products to our new products. Just imagine, in a company of our size, in just 6 years, 30% of our revenues are coming from the new business. We're today dedicating 99% of our R&D spend to the smoke-free products. And given all the developments that we had on science and technology, we're starting to open ourselves also to a variety of opportunities that go beyond nicotine. So this is the context in which we have operated in the past 6 years. And this is the context in which our supply chain also changes have taken place. So you wanted to tell me something, brother?
Yeah, no, so this is quite incredible, and I don't know many companies that have managed to pull such a transformation off. The example, and maybe I should connect you to him, Chuawi. So I think he's in Geneva. So he's the Chief Transformation Officer of ST Microelectronics. And why I thought of him, I don't know if you know him, but why I thought of him, because similar to what your story with, a company that was maybe historically focused on marketing and how do you position and sales, right? Then you went into focus more on the product development. Similarly, he, in his transformation of the ST Microelectronics, he was telling us a story about how he convinced the CEO to say, look, finance is important and running the best invoicing systems, sure, it's important, but it's not why companies and clients come to us, yeah? It's because we are very good at engineering, we are very good at products, so let's put on the pedestal the right organizations, the right people, the right capabilities, right? And make sure that we focus where the crux of our business is and not on the peripherals. So I just thought I'll bring that into the discussion, and it sounds to me that that's something that you have done at PMI. So let's go a little bit deeper, Massimo. And
let's go to supply chain, rather, I would suggest, right?
Exactly.
Let's look at what that means for supply chain. So figure this, it's 2018, and I am asked to take over the role of Chief Supply Chain Officer in Philip Morris, we call it Senior Vice President of Operations for all of PMI. And so from my nice office here on Lake Geneva, what am I looking at? Well, I'm looking at a variety of things that need to change if we are to evolve the supply chain to where the business needs it, right? The first big change is the realization that there needs to be a transformative pivot in our operations setup, by which we were used to dealing with a B2B business. It was stable for us by definition. We didn't have too many problems with demand changes. We were shipping containers to distributors, and we need to become B2C, namely being able to go and address each of those 21.2 that we have right now, million, one by one. A function inside the company that is largely manufacturing centric and that really need to shift to being supply chain centric, seeing and building supply chain as the brain of everything that we do in operations and to a large extent inside the company. And a function that has traditionally been used to do a lot of manual work, running on very long processes, and that needs to become significantly more agile, significantly faster, capable to handle a significantly larger scale of complexity, and more nimble in the way it works. This was the big first piece of change that I was looking at. Second big piece of change that connects to the largely manual that I mentioned before, the fact that when we looked around and where the others have gone with technology and internal processes and how they were running business, we realized that we needed to leapfrog in the use of data, technology, digital tools across all of the activities that we were running if we wanted to manage to fulfill the expectations that the business had for this evolution of the business in terms of complexity, ability to deal with volatility in demand, that for us was something that was relatively unknown in the past, the velocity of introduction of products and phasing in and phasing out, and an increasing shifting of consumer expectations versus the past, in which consumers do require to change product and have a new thing, can also start shifting to a different pattern of consumption that we were not used with in the past. And a third big element of change that is doing the first two does require a significant evolution of the organization. And that meant an evolution in terms of how we are structured internally, what are the capabilities that we need in the organization of the different people, and what is the culture that we want to start building inside the function. And so we started looking in this last aspect at elements of centralization, for instance, versus decentralization, and which is the better model. We ultimately selected to go for more centralization, and centralization giving ownership and accountability to the different functions inside operations on a global scale. We started building vertical depth in the different areas that we were running with an aim to increase significantly effectiveness and performance of each of the areas, which meant building capabilities inside each of the areas. We had to start building digital and data savvy across the organization, and we realized that trying to do that alone would have been a long journey, and I'll come back on this one. And ultimately, we realized that there were two phases of the journey that we had to take. There was a first phase of depth in which we needed to build in each of the areas, and especially in supply chain, in-depth capability in this new context that we had, but that had to be followed by an area of by a phase of depth in which we needed to start increasing the collaboration end to end, because more and more every activity that we were performing was required cross-functional work inside supply chain, but I would say at this point end to end in the entire company. Ultimately, I would say the fundamental, if nothing else you remember from all that I said, but what I'm about to say, the key element that we had to shift was our ability to learn to unlearn. We were relying on such a successful business and such a wealth of experience from such a long period of time that actually became our worst enemy. In doing new things like launching for the first time our IQOS product, for instance, we tried to do it the old way. We tried to plan every step of the launch leveraging on all the experience that we had from all our cigarette launches in the past. And we worked on that planning for a year. And ultimately we did it. It was in Italy, actually, our first pilot market in Milan. We selected Milan, prominent city. We invested a lot of money in that launch, and we fell flat on our face. And I think that was a wonderful early realization of the fact that what has served us well until now and brought us here in terms of experience doesn't necessarily apply to a completely new world where we're trying to do with consumers completely different things. And I think if nothing else you remember from all that I've said so far on the changes, that fundamental element in a transformation of this magnitude, to be ready to put behind what keeps you comfortable and to open yourself up to learn rapidly what is necessary for the new, is a fundamental element of the journey.
I'll interrupt you just for 1 second, Massimo, because this is the crux of all transformations. Actually, it's not the technology per se. Most people have, I remember Ken Allen, he's a board member of DHL, and I think Ken had a saying that 90 or 95% of all strategies are more or less the same. More or less companies use the same 3 to 5 companies that do strategy consulting and management consulting. Most of it the same. The key is execution, and the key of execution is change management. So let's go a little bit deeper into the change management. Maybe you can give us some tips and tricks. You mentioned a very good example of what didn't work, right? And that, the past versus the present, right? And but can you give us some even more tangible case studies of how did you do that change management in the minds of the organization and of the people, which is usually the hardest to change?
Okay, excellent question. Actually, one of the first things that we did, Radu, after with the management team, we'd done a period of working on the strategy and what are the avenues that we're going to pursue and so forth. We actually spent about 3 months working exactly on that, the change management. And together with the team, we put together what is the story that we're going to tell our people? How are we going to say it? How are we going to cascade it across the organization? And we spent 3 months just preparing ourselves for us to do this. Then the first step that we took was that we brought our top 150 leaders in the world up to speed on it in sessions in which we broke them in group of 20 or 30. Look, there were certain groups for which this change was actually pretty significant. If I tell you that you are a manufacturing director, in the past you were king of a big kingdom in the market, and all of a sudden we're saying we now want to shift the focus to supply chain, you feel a certain element of resistance because that touches you personally, right? And we did the first element of engagement with all of them, and we explained the vision, we explained the why this was necessary, we explained the business context, and we explained what we wanted to do, how we were thinking about it, and what we wanted to accomplish from it in the 3 years. I have to tell you that speaking in 3 years, when there is a change of this magnitude, is not always a good thing. People can swallow smaller things. They can understand if you want to take them up to Mount Everest, but many people will say, maybe not for me. But if you say, you know what, I want to take you to the first base camp, most people will come. And therefore, we had to break that to digestible chunks. And then the thing that we did was to cascade this down in the organization. We actually asked those leaders to cascade it down in the organization. And we, as management team of the function, went and were present at the different venues, but we were there only to support. It was really the local leader that was carrying the organization through. And we asked them to do then 2 things. The first one was we had a capability building plan revolving around our integrated work system that we had put in place inside Philip Morris is called Open Plus, that helped us in structuring the journey in terms of the strategy definition at the local level. And the second thing was we asked them to focus only on what they could contribute to that would be accretive to the results that we wanted to achieve. So they knew what were the stretching targets that we had, but we said, don't look at the entire picture. The entire picture is scary. But if you're working in a factory and we're expecting from you that you start working on waste elimination, for instance, and we want to take it to 0, and that we want you to increase the OEE in your factory and we want to take it to 85%, What is it that you could do in your entity in order to start working on that? And we started building it on digestible chunks. We had to do that in every place. So if I take supply chain, and I will maybe, if there is time, I will talk to it a little bit. In supply chain, we had to radically transform the processes. We realized that we needed to leapfrog in supply chain. We were largely working manually. We were largely working on a B2B model, and we needed to rapidly evolve the technology that we use, evolve the use of data, automate it, and redesign our processes and the capabilities of our people. It's a pretty scary journey to take people on. In that particular case, we involved the entire team in participating in the design of that journey with us. The entire team of the supply chain, entire team in the world is large. But let's say we took everyone that was in a senior manager and director position to take part to that design. And we did a fairly long phase of design, and we constantly kept challenging each other. In that particular case, rather, we had to challenge certain fundamental myths that we had from the past. In the past, we had always first started by designing processes. Then after having designing processes, we would try to retrofit the processes to systems, and then we would try to get people to work with those systems. And in doing it in this new constellation, we actually said, you know what, we're coming from behind. Here we need to leapfrog, but we have an opportunity in it. We can take the latest technology that is available. Our view is that we should go in an environment where to manage this complexity, we should run a touchless supply chain to the largest extent possible. Let's see which technology allows us to do this. And once we have identified the technology, let's go do the work on data, and we will adapt the processes that we have to what the technology allows, and we'll focus our efforts on building the capabilities of our people to do so. Now, another piece of change management that we had to do on that rather was, how do we avoid doing everything sequentially and in-house? One of the legacies that we had in Philip Morris is that we were so strong and so successful that we would think that we were the best at doing everything. When I was looking at migrating supply chain towards digital use of data and B2C rather than B2B, and I thought each of this change by itself is going to take years. And by the time I'm done, I'm still behind on the rest. How do we go find partners that can help us in this? That was an activity that did require change management because we were naturally not particularly prone to giving business out to partners. But we found strategic partners that could help us with the technology to achieve the touchless that we wanted. We found strategic partners that could do better than us activities like master data management. That is something that is absolutely fundamental in every supply chain. But let's face it, it's something that nobody either wants to do, and if you look at the executive level, nobody spends time on looking at how good your master data management is, right? And so we decided, why don't we go take someone that understands supply chain, that is skilled at running processes in a digital environment in supply chain, and that is proficient at doing master data management, and let's sign up a partnership and let's give to them that piece of work so that they contribute to our journey. It took effort, and it took, in that particular case, a lot of giving confidence to people that senior management was behind in doing this, and we were aware of the risks that we were taking by doing this. But once we gave people that latitude and that comfort, people actually ran for it, and that turned out to be a very strong piece of what we did. So look, it has been throughout the several years. Change management, in my opinion, one of the things that sometimes we forget about, but with the fact that actually we became sensitive to it, one of the most important element of success in the things that we have done.
Okay, let me twist the question.
Yeah.
And if you were to do it all over again, right? So go back 6 years, right? Knowing what you know today, what would you do differently?
What would I do differently? Look, to a large extent, the things that we have done have worked. Yeah, and I must say, when we started this journey, nobody had an idea of 2020 and 2021 when we were hit in a sequence by COVID, by the electronic shortages, by the logistic disruptions, by the material shortages, and last but not least now by the war. And I must say that to a very large extent, all the things that we have done has served us extremely well. The efforts that we spent in building elements like visibility in our supply chain end to end, from upstream, 1, 2, or 3 tiers above us in the chain, all the way down to point of sale and consumer level. This paid a lot of dividends for us. Having digitized a variety of activities with digital twins that allowed us to rapidly run scenarios and simulations in real time on events that were happening paid a lot of dividends for us. There have been a lot of things that in the environment of the past 24 months of massive disruption, we would have not been able to cope as successfully as we have been without having them. Having said that, did everything go right? No, it didn't. And as I said, and I will link back to what I said at the beginning, crises are an inflection point and a pivotal point. The point is, what do you do with that, right? And we learned a lot from this crisis in terms of what actually worked and what didn't. I'll take an example. We have invested significant amount of effort on digitizing our demand forecast, right? And so we do demand sensing, we rely on algorithms and so forth. In an environment that becomes significantly disruptive like the one that we had before, algorithms require tailoring, and therefore our algorithms became not necessarily that reliable in an environment that was significantly disruptive, and where certain elements of supply and demand, look at COVID in the early days, significant down trading, a number of things happened a little bit out of control, and our algorithms were not all that skilled at doing that. So yes, the technology helps, but you need to make sure that you're constantly fitting it for the circumstances that you are dealing with. A couple of other things in our scenario planning, for instance, we realized that early last year, going back now and studying our data, we realized that early last year, we could have picked up the signals of material shortages above and beyond the electronics that were already there. Right? We started picking up signals in the data now that we did the retrospective on increases in lead times, misses on perfect fulfillment of an order from our suppliers, but we were not attentive and we were not careful in actually deriving the insights from that data and what do we do with that. And this is a big learning that we have had. So we now have a massive amount of data. How do we make sure that we have the early signal identified so that we can react upon them? And probably I would say one last thing in terms of the capabilities that we have built. The capabilities supported us very well, but in an environment of disruption, there is a temptation also always to go back to what we feel comfortable with, right? So one of the key mantra when we started the journey was we will kill Excel and we will move everything to the machine to make it touchless, and we do not want any work on Excel anymore. Well, guess what? In an environment that is disrupted, people start redoing their Excel spreadsheet because they think that they are contributing to that. And there was a certain amount of work that went back to manual. This is something that we are re-eradicating now, right? In the moment of crisis, people tend to go back to the bad habits. And I will mention one last one, but it's not something that we did bad, but it's probably more a learning from the magnitude of the crisis that we had. In parallel to all the things that we did, we pushed our efficiency significantly. And the technology and all the work that we did in supply chain gave us an opportunity to slim ourselves down in terms of working capital, inventory, and the variety of other things, which was terrific from a performance perspective. If you all of a sudden put on the lens of shortages, inflation, and a war, then resilience take a different and puts a different shade on the activities that you perform. And therefore, what we're doing right now is we're retailoring our systems in order to make resilience one of the key parameters that we want to optimize in the network that we run. So these are all learnings that we're having right now in retrospective, and on which we're building the further evolutions of what we're doing.
No, thanks for keeping it real. Now, moving kind of towards the last segment of the chat, which is around people and the capabilities of people and the skills and talent that you need in the organization. Now, the change pretty much that you've gone through, and you still have a way to go, but it's significant. From making the cigarettes, right, to making electronics is quite mind-blowing, right? And it's impossible that you have all that talent in-house because you're literally shifting your products. So I guess my question is how, and you mentioned partners, right? And you outsource some things, that's a very smart thing, but how do you decide, okay, this particular thing, I have the in-house talent, this one I need to buy, right? Or I need to attract the talent. Based on what? Any principles that you used, any threads that can be maybe useful to our audience?
Okay, so throughout the journey, there have been a few lenses that we have used to identify where we had a gap that maybe we did not want to fill in from inside or from within, and where we wanted to go from the outside. We looked at significant gaps on capabilities, and especially in the areas of data, digital analytics. This was one element. Significant gaps in internal process running. And I will bring the example of IBP. One of the fundamental elements that we brought in, there were two, in my opinion, key operating frameworks that we brought in to significantly change the way we worked. IWS, that we call Open Plus in manufacturing, and IBP in how we run the planning for the entire company. And in those particular areas, yes, we did training inside, but we also wanted to bring in people from the outside that could bring the knowledge, the experience, having lived it on their skin, in order to help us accelerate the journey. We did so in manufacturing when it was about IWS. And in all those cases, we looked at the experience that people had had, whether it was relevant to where we wanted to go and the things that we wanted to do. And from a behavioral standpoint, the behaviors that these people displayed, whether they fit certain key behaviors that we wanted to establish as fundamentals for the culture inside operations. I tell you, we have focused our journey on behaviors on three fundamentals behaviors. The first one is ownership. How do you always stay above the line? And in front of any problem, you say, what can I do to contribute to solve it? The second one has been openness and humility. If you have no openness and no humility, there is no way that you can be successful in a transformation of this type. And the third one that is also indispensable for a transformation of this type is being naturally forward-leaning. You know what happens when you lean forward? You need to move, and you need to move forward, right? You can't be standing. If you lean forward, you need to move. And so people that are prone to moving forward. So we've been looking at, do they fill a gap that we have? Is the experience that they have the one that fills gaps of activities that we need to perform? And from a behavioral standpoint, will they contribute to the culture that we want to do? That we want to bring in. Now, if you now ask me, and if part of your question was, at this point, for a person that wants to go into supply chain, and maybe a young person that wants to go into supply chain, what should that person think of? What kind of areas should that person get skilled at? I would say, look, the business is going digital at the speed that we have never seen before. So fluency on how do you manage through data? And what can you do with digital tools and the use of data has become of paramount importance. We've done a lot of things. We're starting to do things, for instance, with artificial intelligence. It's evident that that's for us the next frontier in making our supply chain touchless. If I had to advise my son that wants to go to university and then into supply chain, what he should really be good at, managing through data, understanding digital, artificial intelligence, and how you can reshape an activity by using those is absolutely paramount, in my opinion. In my opinion, there is a second element that for a person that wants to go into supply chain is of fundamental importance, that is understand your customer. And probably the best way to understand your customer is being a customer. And so what do you expect when you're the customer, and what are the people up from you not doing? And when you come into supply chain, the fundamental element is, how do you look at the world, not through your eyes of your KPIs, but how do you look at the world through the eyes of the person that you're serving, and what is that person expecting? If you start taking that lens, it changes completely the way you interpret your work. And potentially one last skill that an environment of transformation like ours is fundamental is what I told you at the beginning, that willingness, that intrinsic willingness to disrupt yourself and to learn to unlearn. Therefore, how do you abandon what you knew and accept the fact that there may be a different way to do it, or that you need to learn rapidly a way to do it in a different way, and that works better? I think those are all soft aspects that contribute to the success of the people that we have brought in, and to the development for our organization, to be successful in this journey.
And like the saying goes, the soft skills are the hard skills. So yeah, it's definitely that.
You know what, on this thing that you just said, and that's why in the journey that we have put so much emphasis on the element of culture, because culture is about the behaviors that people display and what they intrinsically know that is expected, right? And so what you said is absolutely right. The soft skills are the hard skills. If the person has an intrinsic nature of openness to learn or of wanting to lean forward, the person will compensate for a variety of other gaps in knowledge that may be existing. But if those elements that are behavioral elements are missing, then quite frankly, whatever experience a person may have will always remain like a status quo.
Yeah, very well added. Final question from me, Massimo. In your career, right, if you're to look back and maybe to the younger generation listening to this, what would be one piece of advice, one principle that has been most helpful to you, one lesson that has helped you the most?
You will be confronted in your career with, actually in your life, with moments of change that will scare you. And those are going to be the moments where the decisions that you make will define you. And more often than not, if you're ready to confront that fear and overcome it, even in the small things, you will come out of that situation stronger. I will give a concrete example so you understand. At a certain point, you may be asked to move country and abandon your family of origin and go to the other side of the world. And there is a great opportunity there. But you will be thinking, my friends, my family, going to the unknown. That has happened to all of us. When you're confronted with those fears, it really shakes you to the root. What you do with that and how you're capable to overcome it will define then how big the learning is going to be after. I have gone through that many times, and I've come out each of those situations much stronger, much more enriched, and loving the step that I took and being ready to do it again. So I would say to anyone that is confronting the career, moments of crisis, moments of fear, moments of big change, just think it will be one step at a time. Confront them, embrace the change, go for it. Pain will last for a short time, but then you will start being excited about what you're doing and you will learn so much more. There is a Latin say that is vincit qui se vincit, which means wins he who wins himself. Those moments of big change are the moments in which you need to win over yourself and go for it.
Love it. Well, on that note, Massimo, grazie mille. Like they say in Italy, many, many thanks for joining us for the great sharing session. We could have, quite literally, I could have probably spoken to you for hours and there's so many more lessons from the transformation journey. I think I'll have you again. But many thanks for joining us today and good luck and keep up the great work.
Thank you very much, Rado, and thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. If you liked what you heard, be sure to go to www.elcotglobal.com and click the podcast button for all the show notes of the interview. Also subscribe to our mailing list to get our latest updates first. If you're listening through a streaming platform like iTunes, Spotify or Stitcher, we would appreciate a kind review. 5-star works best to keep us going and our production team happy. And of course, share it with your friends. I'm most active on LinkedIn, so do feel free to follow me. And if you have any suggestions on what to do and who to invite next, don't hesitate to drop me a note. And if you're looking to hire top executives in supply chain or transform your business, of course, contact us as well to find out how we can help.